Okay, I'm off the Washington coast here, Lopez Island. Wanting to come out and make and set a crab trap, and part of what I need to do to make the trap is build a fire. So I was going to do a bow drill kit here, and mostly I'm just getting set up. I'm underneath a Doug fir. It's a fairly windy day today, so I'm just trying to get in behind this branch cover and stay out of the weather as much as possible. A little bit of light rain. We've actually had dryish weather the last couple of days, but the last week we've had snow a couple times and a couple of rains and several windstorms, and pretty typical Washington weather here. I'm in a bit of a hurry because I got to work today, so I'm going to just start processing some materials and make a bow drill fire. I know you've probably seen it a million times, but I figured I might as well have the camera on while I'm working. And then I'm going to be taking this plastic piece here. There's 8 snares inside of this that I tied up out of some bank line, very fine bank line. I would normally use fishing line, but I figured for the camera that would be a lot easier to see. So if you can see the black dots on that, but there's 8 dots that I drew on there, mostly so you could see them, that I'm going to tie those snares to. Bait will go inside of this jar, and I need to melt holes where those marks are, as well as additional holes. Bait will go inside of here. This gets tossed out into the ocean, and with these 8 snares hanging around it, crabs come up to that, or maybe possibly even fish, get their legs tangled in, and when I pull the line back in, all the snares close, if they haven't already closed around their legs just from their moving around, and you can actually pull crabs in that way. I've never seen anybody do it quite like this before, but when I was down in California, there's a method. People would actually take this little wire cage with half dozen snares around it and cast it out on a fishing line, and families would go out in Monterey Bay and all that, or Half Moon Bay, and that's what they do on the weekends, catch crabs with their family. So I'm going to make my own. I think it'll be a little bit more effective because there'll be more snares on it and they'll work a little differently. But when you're on the Washington coast in wintertime, there's really only one source of dry wood, and that tends to be cedar. Actually, I want to use this thing right here. These are all 3 pieces of cedar, and cedar does not become waterlogged like every other wood I know of, even if it's been out in the ocean for some time. It stays light and dry on the inside of it, and if you baton it out or use an axe, then you can get at the dry wood inside. But if it's got any cracks in it, the water will still get in. So you have to be picky about your wood. All this I just found kind of the better source for it. I found this tossed up behind this tree right here. When we got a real ripper going, the winds are breaking out here, and they're flinging driftwood up onto the shore, and you can find these busted up pieces of cedar tossed up underneath a tree up high onto some grass or something, so they're not in constant contact with the ground and out in the air. You can usually find it. Cedar tends to bust up into some good chunks, and I'm making this wedge right now just because I'm trying to break a larger piece of wood than my blade is long on this knife. It's about a 4.5 inch long blade that I put on this thing, and once you get out beyond 3 inches of diameter, you start having problems with being able to have purchase on the end to knock on. So just making this up real quick. It's actually a scrap piece of alder from a spoon I carved last night, and just happened to have it laying around. So I'm going to put that in that little cut that I made, and make sure your hand is well out of the way of that, and you just dry this just like you would a splitting wedge. And you can see in there, it is bone dry inside of this. This is a nice piece of dry cedar. Man, it smells. Cedar has like this amazing smell to it, especially when it's tight-grained old growth like this. It's like it almost smells like bubble gum, believe it or not. It's very interesting. Let me see if I can't get one more plank out of this guy. When you're batoning with your knife, always make sure that you know, when it splits, your knife is going to go down on a piece of wood and not into some rocks or sand or something like that, because it's your blade. Oh, that's good right there. You can actually do this with as big a log as you want. Make big old shingles, longhouses, whatever. That's how longhouses were made around here. They would split these massive cedars and make huge boards that they could make all their walls and roofs out of and stuff. So what I really wanted that was for this platform, so I could break up these smaller pieces of cedar. This has got a big crack running through it, so water's gotten into some of it, but we'll see what we can do with it. One of the problems with beechwood is all the cracks are full of sand, so it's another reason to use wedges if you can, is you're not running your blade through sand. That's wet. This is all bone dry. I'm going to see if I can't cleave off that wet stuff and make some feather sticks out of this. Okay, I'll save that for later. And then this should be pretty well dry. All of this goes high and dry. I don't put it down on the wet sand. It's like a form of hygiene out here, keeping things dry. I don't know how else to put it, but water hygiene, it's a big deal out here. If you're not aware of it, if you're not from the Northwest or somewhere else that's cold and wet. Okay, that's all dry. Over there. Okay. Cedar makes really fantastic kindling and tinder, but it's actually not the best feather stick wood because it doesn't like to curl. It'll split, but it splits off straight. And when I do a feather stick, I don't like to use my knife hand so much. I like to use the piece of the wood hand, and I feel like it's a lot more stable to draw back than to push forward, so I get better feather sticks that way. And the reason I started doing that is if I ever had one hand injured, you can actually hammer your knife into a piece of wood and then draw back against it, and you can do it one-handed that way. But while practicing that one time, I realized it was just easier to do it that way anyway. This is a big old float I just found on the beach. It's a really nice seat. So I'm just making up some feather sticks here. Yeah, so the fact that cedar does not become waterlogged is something that a lot of folks don't know about it. It's one of the most important facts of cedar, because it allows you, Western red cedar is one of the best bow drill woods and hand drill woods in the world. It's just light and airy. It's got like, I don't know, it's almost like, I don't know how to describe it, but it takes to friction fires very well. And in this environment where it's just gonna be wet like 6 to 8 months out of the year, if you don't know that about Western red cedar, you may think that it's impossible to get a fire built in that area, and it's not. Well, there's a pretty good feather stick right there. Make a few more of these real quick. Sorry if you've seen this a million times. I'm just, like I said, I didn't have any reason to not have the camera running. So you can see my right arm is pretty much just locked out in front of me, and I'm drawing the wood back over the knife instead of trying to control the knife. You can angle the knife one way and get the curls to go off to one side. So like this way it'll bring them off to the left, this way it'll bring them off to the right. But what I tend to do, and you'll do that so that you get a nice fan of curls, but what I do is I just rotate the stick like this, and that tends to work out pretty well for me, but it's good to know how to do both ways, for sure. Do this stuff, you know, you can know how to do something, you can learn how to do it, read about it, watch the YouTube, somebody showed you, practice it once, whatever, and you'll get the concept, but you don't really necessarily know the subtleties, which is where, you know, things really come together, the devil's in the details sort of thing. And, you know, sometimes the concept is enough, but there's a lot of variables out in the world. If you don't know how to adapt to them, and if you don't know, you know, what you can do to make things a little better, I'm going to make a little bit of a finer one here, then, you know, your laboratory condition practicing, or even just reading about it, might not be flexible enough to adjust to a windy, cold day in Washington State. Or having a dislocated shoulder because you just flipped your car in the mountains, or whatever. I try to think about scenarios that I have found myself in, or might find myself in, or have almost found myself in, and I train for those. So one of them that I think about is all my family's over back in eastern Washington near Spokane, and I live in western Washington on a little island. But I like to go see them during the holidays, and that means I'm driving through mountain passes in the wintertime. Significant mountain passes with a lot of Nimrod drivers out there and gnarly conditions, and I've outfitted a vehicle that handles those conditions well, but I was driving through Snoqualmie Pass one time, and two cars right in front of me, it was at a 3-lane highway, one was on the right, one was on the left, and the one on the right started to spin like this, and then the one on the right started to react to it, and it went spin, and they both started doing this pirouette right in front of me, you know, 4 or 5 car lengths in front of me, and I ended up having to weave between the two of them in the most horrible, you know, driving icy conditions, and just barely threaded the needle between those two cars. It could have been a 3-car pileup, and we could have all been spending the night out in the mountains that night, and hopefully one of us would be competent and uninjured enough to keep us all in decent shape till the plow trucks came in the morning or something. But that's a scenario that I think about. All right, car just flipped, I'm in the mountains, it's gonna be dark soon, and I'm spending the night out, the car's upside down and leaking gasoline, I can't use it as a shelter. How am I gonna stay warm that night? So that's like one of my scenarios for what am I gonna, kind of a shelter am I gonna build. kind of bedding am I going to make out of the seats of my car, out of the floor mats, out of the clothes I have on, the extra blanket I keep in there, all of that. And yeah, and I try to make it fun. It's not like I'm doing this out of fear. I really enjoy doing this stuff. I've been doing it since I was a kid. But I also want it to be practical and useful in my life. And I've quite honestly, I've saved my butt by being able to build a fire once or twice. I went backpacking into some hot springs in the North Cascades a few years back, and is one of the more dangerous hikes I'd ever done because it just rained. Seattle just broke its all-time record of rain, of 28 inches of rain in 5 days. And I was actually in a rainier place than that. I was on the west side of the Cascades, so I don't know how much rain we got. But then the temperatures dropped into the teens right on the tail of that. So the entire freaking world was saturated with ice. So just you take a piece of kindling like this and you'd break it and it had ice crystals inside of it. And I had to build a fire in that once to save my butt because I was out, well, either that or spend the night in the hot springs. We got there, me and a good buddy of mine, soaked in the hot springs all day, came back at camp, already night, we're gonna make dinner. I climb into the tent and I realized that my water bladder, it's like a 2-liter water bladder that I placed underneath my sleeping bag so it didn't freeze hard, had a small leak into it, and it leaked all day long into my sleeping bag, which was already only like a very old 20-degree sleeping bag. So it was more like a 40-degree bag at that time, and I'm usually cool with that because I'm a pretty warm-blooded guy. I had to get a fire going that night or I was going to either not sleep at all and just shiver all night, get hypothermic, or I was going to have to hike back to the hot springs 3/4 of a mile in the dark and spend the whole night in a hot spring that I just soaked in for all day, and I was already had my fill of soaking in the hot spring. So pretty good with that number of feather sticks there. Might notice I put on some weight here. I actually was going around collecting grass from this stuff behind me and wanting to keep it dry and dry it out even more. So I put it inside of my warm, dry vest and brought the temperature up a little bit, which will drop the relative humidity in the fuel and dry it out somewhat. This is usnea. Came off of the tree right over my head. It's actually a really good herbal stuff. It's good for fighting infections, but you can use it as fire starter. It's beautiful for that, but it will suck moisture right out of the air if it's a damp day. So I stuck it in here to dry it out some. It actually feels pretty good now, but it's not perfect. And then this is just some kind of reed grass that's around here. None of these fuels are optimal. I can still just feel just a teeny bit of dampness in here. So this might be, you know, we'll see. This will be a challenge. That's what I'm doing this for anyway. I got a lighter in my pocket, but I'll try and break these up into as fine a fiber, a lot of dust in that, as I can. And if this doesn't work, I'll show you what I do to hedge my bets. That little crab container, I keep those whenever I get a jar of mayonnaise or peanut butter or whatever. I keep the jar. These things are totally waterproof. They're super durable. This is a fire kit. I've got a ferro rod, a lighter, birch bark, fat wood, cotton balls, rubber bands which burn when wet. There's a beeswax candle in here which I can also use to dress the string on my bow, and flint striker. You know, anything I can think of. There's even, I think there might even be a magnifying glass in this one, but that's probably in my bigger one. Yeah, it's in a bigger one. But at any rate, this is a guaranteed fire in this little unit, and it lives in my backpack. I have a bigger one that lives in my kayak. I have another large one that lives in my Jeep. And I know I could get fire going with this, and it was free. It's all stuff that I just had laying around. So these little fire kits are worth doing. They're really easy to make, and You know, that's not a $100 Pelican box waterproof container. It's something I got out of the recycling bin. So I'm gonna break this stuff up fine as I can. This stuff really breaks down nicely. Hopefully it gets dry enough for me to do the job. That is just gorgeous nesting material there. Your face is some of the most sensitive skin on your body, and you're trying to feel if something is damp or not. You put it up against the skin on your face and pretty easily feel if it's got moisture in it or not. This stuff actually feels pretty good, but trust the grass more than it. So I'm going to do that. Get a little nest. This is the size of a nest you want minimum if you're trying to get the fire going. You want something that'll burn for a little while if you've got questionable fuels you're trying to ignite. In addition to the feather sticks, this nest, there's a bunch of these little twigs right off of this tree. These have been high and dry, and you hear that snapping? That means it's nice and dry on the interior. There's tons of that overhead. I've got more branch wood behind me. I'm just going through a checklist in my mind. Do I have everything I need to make a fire that'll burn for a minimum of 20 minutes without me having to add anything to it? Because that's how long it might take me to find more fuel. So I always do this checklist whenever I'm building a fire. And it starts with the whole fire ladder. A fire ladder is fuels that go from small to large, and if there's any gaps in there, if I have, you know, a great nest and some twigs and stuff, that's great. I can get a fire started, but can I ignite a log with it? And in order to get to a log, you need to burn branch wood. In order to burn branch wood, you need twigs. In order to burn twigs, you want something. You can't miss any of those steps in the ladder, or you won't have a fire. Not this time of year, at least. So just trying to be really mindful about that right now. And I think I'm more or less there. So I'm gonna get the bow drill kit out, and I'm gonna set this here nice and high and dry. All this little light fuzzy stuff, put right in there. Okay. All right. So the bow drill kit, like I was saying earlier about putting stuff in my jacket to keep it warm and dry, that's what I did with this. This kit has actually been out in the weather for the last week and a half, for more than almost 2 weeks now, because I brought it out on Valentine's Day to do my Skype interview, and it's just been out. It's been snowed on, it's been rained on. The cup that was sitting right next to it had about 1.5 inches of water in it when I grabbed them this morning an hour or two ago. So they are wet, but this one is made out of cedar. These are all made out of the same kind of wood, and I do not know what it is. I broke it out of a pallet that came from the Amazon or who knows where. But it's been some of the best bow drill wood I've ever used. So I'll show a little bit about how I like to do a bow drill set. About a thumb or a finger thickness on my thing there. I like to make my spindle out of the same kind of wood if possible as my board. It means one's not gonna burn through the other a whole lot faster than it otherwise would. I will put my spindle on the board, and that line that it makes there is where I will center my hole. So these holes right here are centered on the edge of that. That means that I have an optimal space for my notch right there. Looks like I'm still in the middle of carving a notch on this side here, so I'll finish cutting that out here. Okay, and then on the bottom of the notch, I broaden it out to about 1/3 of the way up its height. That gives a nice base to the ember so that it's got plenty of mass and it's stable when I want to pick up my my fireboard. and then I have something to move it around on. This looks like it's a little bit damp. Looking for a little base to put underneath my fireboard so I can manipulate the ember. This little cedar piece here looks really good. That buoy had about 7 feet of rope on it too. I could be using that as well, any number of things. But brought my own fire bow. I like them to be pretty long, and I prefer a straighter bow. I just feel like it's more balanced. There's no reason to have a big arc in your bow. And, you know, arm's length from my fingertip to the center of my chest is kind of what I like to go with. Piece of parachute cord on the end there. And I'm going to start out using this mystery wood thing here. I don't know that it's as fire resistant as Western red cedar is, or excuse me, water resistant. Only one way to find out. Looks like those holes are used up. I'm going to use this one right here then. I'll just use the wood there as it is. And the spindle. Spindle looks pretty great. Socket here. This is just a piece of yew wood, piece of branch that I cut a round out of. Put a little hole in it. Put a little spit in it to give it some lubricity. Trying to minimize friction on the top and maximize it at the bottom with the bow drill. Solid. So when I start out, I pretty much stay relaxed through the whole process. There's no reason to get huffing and puffing when you're doing a bow drill. If you got a nice long bow like mine is, you change directions less often, you build heat faster, it's more efficient. I'm already creating black dust and a little bit of smoke, but I know this fireboard is a little bit damp, so I'm just gonna let it absorb some heat for a little while longer. I can't really go for it until the bottom of that notch is filled up with black dust anyway. I see somebody with a dog, it looks like maybe coming over here. Hopefully they aren't going to bug us too much. But yeah, I'm already getting smoke, which means if I can get smoke, it means this fireboard is dry enough to do anything I want with it. So I'm just going to let it fill up a little bit there. Trying to keep my bow as flat, parallel to the ground as possible. And just my right arm, just like a robot, not doing anything special, not straining myself. I'm getting there. I want to have a nice big ember if I'm going to get those damp materials lit, so I'm going to make a big one. You can hear that dog barking. It's burning in there, but I'm going to add some more material just because I want more ember. When you hear that squeaking, it means that you probably had a little bit of glazing happening inside of your board. move all this over into there. Make use of all that material there. Okay, my notch is full. Now I'm gonna give it some more.